If you have understood so much yet, your life keeps repeating. If you have started with determination, only to quietly stop again. If each day passes with busyness, while deep inside you know you are not truly going anywhere, then this is not a video meant to create temporary emotion for you. This is the moment you face a difficult truth that can change the entire trajectory of your life. Your life is not decided by what you know. It is decided by what you repeat every day. And if you are courageous enough to listen until the end, you will not leave here with motivation. You will leave with a different way of living, a way of living that very few people are patient enough to pursue, but those who do never return to who they once were. You are not here because of passing curiosity. The fact that you are still listening at this moment reveals a clear truth. Somewhere deep inside you have begun to question the way you are living, not because you lack knowledge, not because you are not intelligent enough. You have read enough books, you have listened to enough advice, you have understood many things that many people never even touch, and yet your life keeps repeating itself, day after day. Plans are launched with intense emotion and then slowly fade away. Resolutions that once made your heart burn eventually cool down along with familiar routines. And in this very moment you begin to realize that the real issue is not how much you know but what you have been repeating. Life is not built by explosive moments. It is shaped by small actions repeated again and again when no one is watching. You can understand correctly, think correctly, feel correctly. But if each day passes and you do not show up on time for yourself, then all that understanding stays trapped in your mind. It creates no movement, no trajectory, no different future. The most dangerous thing is not a major failure. The most dangerous thing is gentle drifting. The feeling of still being alive but not truly moving toward anything, telling yourself every day that tomorrow will be different only for tomorrow to look exactly like today. Over time, this does not only take away external results but erodes something deeper. Your trust in yourself. Every time you fail to do what you promised, you silently teach your inner world that your words cannot be trusted. No one else hears that lesson, but you remember it clearly. Eventually, you begin to doubt your own ability to change. You think you lack discipline, lack motivation, lack willpower. But the truth is not that harsh. You are not broken. You are simply living without a system strong enough to hold you steady when emotions fade. The most important moment in this journey is not when you feel inspired. It is when you calmly face the reality that if you continue living the old way, the results will remain the same. And if you want a different life, you do not need a massive leap right now. You need a new way of showing up every day. Starting today. Starting with the smallest actions. This is not a story about short-term motivation. This is the beginning of a living map. A map that brings you back to the driver's seat, not through emotion, but through what you choose to repeat even on days when no one applauds. You have seen these many times in your life. Two people start from the same point, the same excitement, the same promises, the same belief that this time will be different. As time passes, one person keeps moving forward even slowly, while the other gradually disappears from the very path they once chose. There is no clear moment of collapse, no major tragedy, just small days passing with reasons that sound completely reasonable. Tiredness, busyness. Not the right time yet. Then one day, looking back, the distance has grown large enough for the one who quit to believe they never truly had a chance from the beginning. But the truth lies somewhere else. The difference is not in the starting point, not in intelligence, not in the initial surge of emotion. The difference lies in the ability to show up when there is no emotion left to support you. The day you wake up without motivation, the day work feels heavy, the day your mind feels foggy, the day no one knows you are trying. Those are the days where life is decided. The one who goes all the way is not the one who always feels good. They are the one who still shows up when emotions refuse to cooperate. They do not wait for a perfect state. They do not wait for overflowing belief. They understand that emotion follows action, not the condition to begin. Every time you show up on an emotionless day, you send a very clear signal to your inner world that you are someone who can be trusted. That signal is small, no one sees it, but it accumulates. Over time, it becomes identity. On the other hand, every time you delay while waiting for inspiration, you reinforce a different identity. The identity of someone who only acts when everything feels right. And life is rarely right for long enough to take you far. You do not need a perfect day to move forward. You need a clear standard for showing up. Showing up does not mean doing a lot. It means doing what you committed to, even if it is very small. Opening the document even for a few minutes. Stepping outside even for a short walk. Sitting down and starting even when your mind wants to escape. When you do that, you are not just completing a task. You are training yourself. You are teaching your nervous system that discomfort does not destroy you. That resistance can be moved through. That you do not need to feel ready in order to act. This is where many people misunderstand. They think discipline is force, tension, fighting against yourself. But discipline at a deeper level is clarity. Clarity about what you do on emotionless days. Clarity about the minimum threshold you still keep. Clarity about the promise you do not negotiate with yourself. When that standard is held long enough, you no longer need motivation. You have momentum, and momentum is what carries people far. You can lose emotion for a day. You can lose belief for a moment. But if you do not lose the habit of showing up, you will not lose direction. This is especially important for adults who have been through enough disappointment. You are no longer easily stimulated by strong words. You have heard too many. What you need is not another powerful message. What you need is a life structure strong enough to hold you on bad days. And that structure begins with one very simple question. On this emotionless day, how will I still show up? Not how much will I do, but will I show up or not? When this question is answered every day with small actions, you slowly step to the other side of the difference. The side of those who do not disappear halfway. The side of those who do not need to be pushed. The side of those who quietly keep going until results are no longer something to hope for, but something that becomes inevitable. Procrastination does not appear because you are lazy. It appears when the mind feels unsafe. When an important task requires you to face the possibility of being wrong, the risk of failure, the feeling of not being good enough. Your nervous system is programmed to avoid pain, and in the modern world, pain is not only physical. Pain is being judged. Pain is feeling inferior. Pain is facing the truth that results may not turn out as expected. That is why procrastination becomes a natural reflex, a very subtle way to protect the ego. You do not avoid action because you do not want to move forward, but because a part inside you is trying to keep you in familiar territory. A place without challenge, a place without exposure. What makes procrastination dangerous is that it often wears a reasonable disguise. It says you need more preparation, that you should wait until your mood improves, that you need more information, more planning, more time. And because these reasons sound intelligent, you believe them. You believe you are waiting for the right moment, while in reality you are teaching yourself a habit of avoidance. Every time you procrastinate, you are not just delaying a task. You are strengthening a neural pathway, a pathway that says when discomfort appears, retreat is the safe choice. When this pathway is repeated long enough, it becomes the default. And at that point, you no longer recognize procrastination. You simply feel life slowing down. Motivation disappearing. Energy declining. You think the problem is a lack of inspiration, but the truth is, you have become accustomed to retreating whenever uncomfortable emotions arise. Procrastination, therefore, is not a moral issue. It is a biological and psychological one. And this is crucial, so you stop punishing yourself. When you understand this mechanism, you stop labeling yourself as weak. You begin to see that there is a part inside you that is afraid, and that part needs guidance, not force. But understanding alone is not enough. If you stop at understanding, you fall into a more subtle trap, the trap of analysis without action. You can speak eloquently about fear, about avoidance mechanisms. But if each day passes and you still allow resistance to dictate behavior, your life does not move. The core point is this: you do not need to eliminate fear in order to act. You need to learn how to act alongside fear. Those who move forward are not the ones without fear. They are the ones who do not give fear the power to decide. They understand that unease will appear whenever they do something meaningful, and they accept it as part of the process. When you wait until fear disappears, you are waiting for something that never comes. When you wait for absolute certainty, you are postponing indefinitely. Real change happens when you set a new standard for action, a standard not based on emotion but on commitment. Commitment is not a grand promise. Commitment is a very specific action you still take, even when there is internal resistance. And here is a difficult but necessary truth. Prolonged procrastination is not because the task is too hard, but because it is too vague. When the goal is unclear, resistance grows. When the first step is not defined, the mind looks for an escape. That is why an essential part of overcoming procrastination is making action so simple it cannot be refused. Not doing the entire task, just opening it, just starting, just being present for a few minutes. When you do that, you send a new signal to your nervous system that discomfort is tolerable, that you do not need to run, that action does not destroy you. Every time you send that signal, you shrink the power of resistance, not through force, but through consistency. This is especially important for adults who have experienced enough failure. You are no longer afraid of surface pain. You are afraid of reliving old disappointment. You are afraid of placing hope and losing it again. So, you choose procrastination as a way to stay emotionally safe. But the cost of that safety is a life that does not open, does not evolve, does not reflect your true capacity. Procrastination, therefore, is not an enemy to destroy. It is a signal to understand and move through with the right structure. When you begin to treat procrastination as a reflex that needs retraining rather than a flaw to punish you, reclaim power. The power to choose action even when uncomfortable. The power to move forward in small steps. And from here, a quiet change begins. Not through massive motivation, but through no longer believing every whisper that tries to pull you back to where you were. This fracture does not appear as an obvious failure. It forms when action is gradually replaced by rationalized procrastination. You do not say that you have quit. You say that you are preparing. You do not say that you are avoiding. You say that you need more information. Each time you do this, you create a safety cushion for the ego, while the truth is that you are retreating. Rationalized procrastination is the most subtle mechanism because it gives you the feeling of still being responsible. You are still thinking, still planning, still talking about goals, but you are not doing what needs to be done at the time it needs to be done. The distance between intention and action begins to stretch, and it is this distance that drains energy. The longer it remains, the heavier action becomes. The brain starts associating action with tension. It learns that starting is difficult. At that point, you need more effort just to initiate. This is how the fracture is created. Not because you are weak, but because you allowed that distance to grow day after day. Rationalized procrastination often speaks in a very convincing voice. It reminds you of circumstances, of pressure, of accumulated fatigue. It compares you to others who are also slowing down. It tells you that you are not alone. But the truth is that everyone pays their own price for their choices. And your price is not paid immediately. It is recorded. As time passes, you begin to feel a heaviness that is hard to name. You do not lack ability, but you lack momentum. You do not lack understanding, but you lack consistency. You begin to wonder why nothing is progressing even though you think so much. This doubt turns back on itself and makes you even more cautious. The more cautious you become, the more you procrastinate. The loop closes. This is the silent fracture. It does not make you collapse, but it makes you stand still. And standing still in a moving world is a form of falling behind. When action is replaced by rationalized procrastination, your identity also begins to shift. You no longer see yourself as a person who acts, but as a person who thinks. You evaluate yourself by intention instead of results. This lowers your internal standard. You accept knowing as enough, even though deep inside you understand that knowing without doing creates no change. Each time you accept this, you blur the boundary between the person you want to become and the person you are living as. As the boundary fades, returning becomes harder, not because the path disappears, but because you no longer see it clearly. This fracture also distorts the concept of rest. True rest restores you, so you can act again. But rationalized procrastination borrows the name of rest to avoid. You rest but do not recover. You stop but do not regenerate energy. The result is prolonged fatigue. The more tired you feel, the more you believe you need to stop. The loop continues. The only way to break this fracture is not to force yourself to do more, but to restore the direct link between intention and action. When intention appears, action must follow immediately with a very small step. It does not need to be perfect. It does not need to be complete. It only needs to begin. Beginning is the strongest action against procrastination. It shortens the distance. It sends a signal that you are someone who keeps promises to yourself. Each time you do this, you repair the fracture. You do not need to fix everything at once. You only need to repair moment by moment. A moment of standing up when you want to stay. A moment of opening the document when you want to check your phone. A moment of starting when you want to wait longer. These moments are not celebrated on social media, but they are the real foundation. When you accumulate enough moments of keeping your word, the distance between intention and action shrinks. Action becomes lighter. The brain relearns that starting is not dangerous. Then energy returns. Not emotional energy, but structural energy. You no longer need to ask yourself if you feel like it. You act because the rhythm has been established. The silent fracture gradually loses its influence as the rhythm is restored. You no longer need to fight big battles. You only need to prevent procrastination from having a voice. And when action returns to the center, life begins to take clearer shape. You are no longer vaguely busy. You begin to see results, even small ones. These results rebuild trust. Trust brings real motivation. And from here, the story prepares to enter a turning phase where action is no longer a random reaction but becomes a guiding principle. Trust in yourself is not formed by grand affirmations or rare moments of excitement. It is built through very small experiences repeated every day. And for that same reason, it is also broken in a very quiet way. Every time you promise to do something and then do not do it, you are not just missing an action. You are sending yourself a message that your words carry no weight. This message does not need to be spoken. It is felt, and your inner world records it as data. At first, the crack is very small. You still feel confident. You still believe that next time will be different. But as these small broken promises accumulate, they form a pattern. You begin to hesitate with yourself. You hesitate to set goals. You hesitate to commit. Not because you do not want to move forward, but because a part of you no longer believes you will follow through. This is the greatest loss that most people do not see. Not the loss of results, not the loss of opportunity, but the loss of deep confidence that you are someone you can rely on. When this trust weakens, everything else becomes harder. Discipline turns into a burden. Goals turn into pressure. And every new promise carries the memory of previous ones that were not kept. You may try to compensate with stronger motivation, with bigger plans, but that only puts more tension on a thread that is already cracked. Because the problem is not intensity, it is reliability. Trust does not need long leaps. It needs steady steps. And steady steps only appear when you begin to respect your own words at a very small level. There is a difficult but necessary truth. You do not lack discipline. You lack a healthy relationship with yourself. You have become accustomed to negotiating and then breaking inner commitments. You have become accustomed to allowing yourself to slide past what you promised. Each time you do that, you learn that boundaries with yourself are movable. When that boundary fades, you easily break other limits. You let days pass without structure. You allow your energy to be pulled into things that do not nourish you. And then you wonder why you are tired, why you lack motivation, while the root lies in the fact that you have stopped believing that your actions matter. Restoring inner trust does not begin with making more promises. It begins with making fewer promises and keeping them firmly. Instead of saying you will change your life, say you will show up for 10 minutes. Instead of promising perfection, promise that you will not disappear. When you keep these small promises, something very important happens. Your inner world begins to relax. It realizes that your words can be relied on. And as this trust increases, you no longer need to push yourself as hard as before. Action begins to happen with less friction. You no longer have to fight every day. You simply return to the standard you have set. That standard does not need to be high. It needs to be stable. There is another important point that must be made clear. Keeping promises to yourself does not mean never slipping. Slipping is part of the journey. The issue is not that you slip, but how you return. Every time you slip and then quit entirely, you reinforce the story that you are someone who gives up easily. But every time you slip and return, the very next day you write a different story, a story that you can recover. That one misstep does not define who you are. That your commitment is not so fragile that a single bad day can shatter it. This is where real strength is forged, not in perfect streaks, but in the ability to return quickly without self-punishment. When you learn to keep your word to yourself at a small level and learn how to return after slipping, something very deep inside begins to change. You no longer need to convince yourself that you are worthy. You feel it through action. And from here, discipline is no longer a battle. It becomes a natural expression of a relationship that has been repaired. The relationship between you and your own words. When this relationship is strong enough, you no longer ask yourself whether you should act or not. You act because that is who you have chosen to become. Emotion is a signal, not a leader. It reflects your current state, but it is not designed to guide the future. When you let emotion drive your life, you are constantly pulled back and forth between excitement and boredom, between hope and doubt. On days when emotion is high, you move fast. On days when emotion drops, you stop completely. And because emotion is always changing, your direction is never stable. This is why many intelligent people remain stuck. They trust how they feel. They believe that if it does not feel right, they should not act. If they do not feel ready, they should wait. But life does not wait for your emotions to settle. Opportunity does not wait for confidence. Responsibility does not disappear just because you are tired. If you only act when emotion supports you, then you are handing decision-making to something inherently unstable. Commitment is different. Commitment is not based on how you feel on a given day. It is based on who you have chosen to become. Commitment is the anchor in emotional waves. When emotion pulls you left, commitment keeps you centered. When emotion pulls you right, commitment brings you back on track. This does not mean ignoring emotion. It means not allowing emotion to override values. You can feel tired and still show up. You can feel doubtful and still do what you promised. You can feel bored and still keep the rhythm. This is where a deep transformation happens. You are no longer reactive to your inner state. You actively choose behavior, and repeated behavior is what shapes long-term emotion. Many people believe motivation must come before action. But in reality, action creates motivation. When you act, even when you do not want to, you send your brain a very clear message that you are capable of self-direction. This message creates a sense of control. Control creates calm. Calm creates sustainable energy. This is the opposite loop of emotional fluctuation. A loop that lifts you instead of pulling you down. Commitment does not need to be dramatic. It needs to be specific and verifiable. A time, an action, a minimum standard. When commitment is vague, emotion negotiates its way in. When commitment is clear, emotion loses its leverage. You do not ask whether you will act today. You only ask how much is enough to keep your word. This clarity releases a great amount of energy. You no longer need to make the same decision every day. The decision was made in advance, and when the number of decisions decreases, endurance increases. This is something many adults underestimate. They think they lack willpower when in reality they are draining it on unnecessary choices. Commitment removes that exhaustion. Another misunderstanding needs to be addressed. Commitment is not rigidity. It does not require maximum effort in all conditions. It requires that you do not disappear. On strong days you can do more. On weak days you do less. But you still keep the anchor. You still show up. Flexibility lies in intensity, not in presence. When you allow yourself to disappear, you break the trajectory. When you maintain presence, you protect direction. Emotion often resists this. It says doing a little is not worth it. That if you cannot do it well, you should not do it at all. But that is the voice of perfection. And perfection is procrastination's greatest ally. Mature commitment understands that progress does not require perfection. It requires continuity. When you place commitment above emotion, you perform an act of inner leadership. You tell yourself that your value does not depend on temporary states, that you can trust the structure you have chosen. And as this trust strengthens, you no longer need to push yourself. You simply return to the commitment you set. There is a very important moment on this journey, the moment you do what you promised on a low-emotion day. No praise, no recognition, no immediate reward, but inside something shifts. You feel a new steadiness, not loud, not exciting, just a sense of standing a little straighter, a little more self-respect. And that feeling accumulates. It becomes the ground. From that ground, you can build higher without fear of collapse. Emotion will return. It always returns when you act correctly, but this time it is no longer the driver. It is only a passenger. Commitment holds the direction. And when you live long enough within this structure, you realize something essential. True freedom does not come from following emotion. It comes from not being controlled by it. Freedom is the ability to choose action aligned with values even when the inner state is unfavorable. And that is the foundation of mature strength. Not loud, not impulsive, just the ability to remain steady and continue, day after day, until your life begins to reflect that choice. Every major change fails at the same point, the starting point, not because the destination is too far, but because the activation threshold is too high. When you think you must do a lot, do it well, do it fully, the mind immediately activates defense mechanisms. It sees volume, it sees risk, it sees the possibility of failure, and the natural reflex is procrastination. This is not a lack of discipline. This is biology. And the only way through biology is to lower the starting threshold to a level where the nervous system has no reason to object. Starting extremely small is not lowering your standard of living. It is a strategy to overcome initial resistance. When you only ask yourself to do something very small, the brain does not trigger alarms. No pressure, no tension, no reason to escape. And when you start something very small, you break the most dangerous procrastination loop. Inaction creates guilt. Guilt creates avoidance. Avoidance creates more procrastination. One small action, even if insignificant, is enough to cut that loop. It creates movement. And movement is always easier to sustain than stillness. This is why adults need to change how they approach discipline. You do not need to force yourself into high intensity. You need to design easy wins. Victory is not in big results. Victory is in showing up without negotiation. When you open the document, even for a few minutes, you have won. When you step outside, even for a short walk, you have won. When you sit down, even just to begin, you have won. Because you have done the hardest thing. You crossed the threshold of inaction. Starting extremely small has an even deeper effect. It retrains your relationship with effort. Instead of associating effort with pain and tension, you begin to associate it with relief. You teach your nervous system that action is not a threat. And when this relationship changes, action becomes more natural. You no longer have to push yourself. You simply return to the starting ritual you set. This ritual is crucial. It is the bridge between intention and behavior. When the ritual is clear, the brain does not need to decide. It simply follows. And each time you repeat the ritual, you strengthen a new track. The track of someone who starts, even imperfectly. There is a common misunderstanding that needs to be cleared. Many people think starting small will keep them small, but the reality is the opposite. Starting small creates momentum. Momentum allows you to gradually increase without requiring massive willpower. You do not increase because you force yourself. You increase because you are already in motion. Once you are seated, staying a few more minutes is no longer difficult. Once you have started, continuing a bit longer no longer demands courage. What is always hard is the first minute. And that is exactly where you should focus. Those who go far are not the ones who always set big goals. They are the ones who protect the starting point every day. They do not allow themselves to skip the initiation ritual. They understand that if they protect this point, everything that follows will organize itself. Starting extremely small also allows you to face fear in a safe way. Instead of jumping in fully, you only touch lightly. And when you touch without being harmed, fear gradually loses power. You do not need to convince yourself that you can. You prove it through small action. And evidence is always stronger than words. Every day you start even a little, you are building a new data set about yourself. Data that you are someone who shows up. Data that you do not need perfection to move forward. Data that you can work even when you do not feel like it. This data set gradually replaces old stories about lacking discipline, and when the inner narrative changes, behavior follows. Starting extremely small, therefore, is not a temporary tactic. It is the foundation of all sustainable change. It allows you to move through procrastination without fighting. It allows you to build discipline without tension. And most importantly, it allows you to reclaim control through very small actions. Today, in this very moment, when you decide to start even just a little, you are not only doing a task, you are choosing a way of living again. Every difficult day begins the same way. You wake up feeling heavy. Your mind is slow, your body refuses to cooperate. And in that moment, a small decision appears. Either you allow the day to drift on autopilot, or you activate a very simple ritual to begin. The activation rule does not require you to perform well. It only requires you to start. The first few minutes are not meant to produce results. Their job is to break the state of stillness. When you are still, everything feels heavy. When you are in motion, even small motion, everything becomes lighter. This is a biological truth. The human nervous system is designed to adapt to action, but it hates to begin. That is why, if you try to reason with yourself, you will lose. You cannot defeat a biological reflex with logic. You can only go around it with ritual. The activation rule is that ritual. It can be very simple. Open something. Sit down. Breathe. Write one line. Move for a few minutes. Nothing in this rule requires you to feel ready. It only asks you to be present. When you are present for the first few minutes, something important happens. The brain shifts from defense mode to engagement mode. Tension decreases, resistance lowers, and you gain more space to choose. You are no longer dragged by the initial emotion. You are acting from a more regulated state. Many people quit too early because they judge the entire day based on how the first minute feels. They do not give the nervous system a chance to adjust. But when you keep the activation rule long enough, you realize that how you feel at the start of the day says nothing about what you are capable of that day. It is only an initial state, and that state can be changed through small action. The activation rule also has another power that is rarely mentioned. It creates a sense of control. When you complete the ritual even briefly, you send yourself a message that you are not being swept away. You still have choice. And this feeling is critical for adults who have lived under pressure. When you lose a sense of control, you are more likely to give up. When you regain even a very small part of it, you have ground to continue. The first few minutes, therefore, are not trivial. They are the anchor of the entire day. When the anchor is held, you are no longer afraid of difficult days. You know that regardless of how you feel, you still have a way to begin. And when you are no longer afraid to begin, you are no longer afraid of long days. There is a trap to avoid: turning the activation rule into a perfection standard. This rule does not need to be beautiful. It does not need emotion. It does not need deep meaning. It only needs to be done. The day you try to make the ritual special is the day you hand power back to perfection. And perfection always leads to procrastination. The mature activation rule accepts initial ordinariness. It understands that value lies in repetition, not in feeling. When you repeat it long enough, those first few minutes become automatic. You do not need motivation. You do not need reminders. You simply do it because it is how you start the day. And when that happens, something very interesting appears. Difficult days no longer break your rhythm. They only slow it down. But slow is not stop. You still move, maybe less, but still in the right direction. The activation rule also helps you clearly distinguish two things that are often confused: not wanting to and not being able to. Many days you do not want to, but very few days you truly cannot. When you act for a few minutes, you see that not wanting to does not mean not being able to. And this realization changes how you see yourself. You no longer identify with a temporary state. You see yourself as someone who can act despite the state. This is a major step in maturity. When you live long enough with the activation rule, you realize that life is not saved by brilliant days. It is held together by how you handle gloomy days, not with massive effort, but with a small repeated ritual. And that ritual tells the world that even when today is hard, you still show up. Even when slow, you still move. And as long as you do not stop, the trajectory will carry you where you need to go. Discipline is often misunderstood. Many people hear the word discipline and think of force, rigidity, heavy rules that drain joy from life. But that is an external view. From the inside, mature discipline has a different shape. It is not a chain. It is structure, and the right structure does not take away freedom. It frees you from chaos. When life has no structure, you may believe you are free, but in reality, you are being pulled by momentary urges. You react more than you choose. You spend energy re-deciding things you have already decided before. And at the end of the day, you are tired, not because you did too much, but because you lived in a scattered state. Discipline appears to end that condition, not by tightening life, but by clarifying what no longer needs to be reconsidered. When you have fixed frames for showing up, you no longer ask whether you will act today. That question was answered in advance. You simply step in and do what was defined. This is where freedom begins to appear. Freedom is not doing whatever you want in the moment. Freedom is the ability to choose what aligns with your values without being dragged by emotion. And that ability only emerges when you have inner discipline. A person without discipline may believe they are living comfortably, but inside there is always a quiet tension. Tension from knowing they are avoiding. Tension from knowing they could be better. Tension from letting days pass without an anchor. Discipline releases you from that tension. It gives you a place to stand, a stable rhythm, a sense that you are doing what needs to be done, even if imperfectly. And from this base, you can enjoy the rest of life without guilt. Discipline also protects you from poor decisions in weak states. When you are tired, stressed, emotionally triggered, you are more likely to choose what is easy, what is short-term, what temporarily distracts. Discipline sets boundaries before weakness appears. It is like a contract signed when you are clear-headed to protect you when you are not at your best. This is not a loss of freedom. This is a higher form of freedom. Freedom from having to battle yourself every day. Another important point must be clearly understood. Discipline does not require you to do more than others. It requires you to be consistent with your own standard. That standard does not need to be impressive. It needs to be clear enough to be kept. When you keep that standard, you are no longer obsessed with comparison. You do not need to look at others to know whether you are on the right path. You have an inner measure, and that measure brings deep calm. Discipline also creates another subtle form of freedom. Freedom from dependence on motivation. When you do not need motivation to act, you are no longer reactive to the external world. News, other people's words, unexpected events no longer have the power to completely throw you off rhythm. You have a structure to return to. You have a rhythm to continue. This is especially important in adulthood when responsibilities increase and energy is limited. Discipline helps you use energy more efficiently. You do not waste it on internal debate. You use it for action. And repeated action creates a very real freedom. The freedom of knowing you are moving forward. There is a clear moment when discipline begins to transform into freedom. It is when you do what you promised without heaviness. Not because the task became easy, but because you accepted it as part of who you are. You no longer ask why you must do it. You simply do it because it is how you live. And in that acceptance, there is a deep lightness. You no longer need to push yourself. You no longer need to convince yourself. You simply step into the rhythm you have chosen. This freedom is not loud. It does not create instant excitement, but it is durable. It stays with you on ordinary days. It holds you steady when the outside world shifts. And most importantly, it gives you self-respect. When you respect yourself, you do not need to prove it to anyone. You live from the inside out. And that is the foundation of a life that is not pulled in every direction. A life guided by values rather than by fleeting emotion. Every lasting change ends at one point: identity. You do not sustain behavior long-term because of goals. You sustain behavior because you believe that is who you are. When action and identity are misaligned, you must constantly use willpower to drag yourself forward, and willpower does not last. But when action aligns with identity, everything becomes lighter. You no longer ask whether you should act or not. You act because that is what someone like you does. Real transformation begins when you stop asking what you want to achieve and start asking who you are becoming through what you repeat every day. Identity is not created in moments of big decisions. It is forged in small choices no one witnesses. When you keep your word to yourself in silence, you are rewriting your inner story. The story that you are reliable, that your words carry weight, that you do not disappear when things are hard. This story does not need verbal affirmation. It is felt through action. And that feeling is powerful. It changes how you stand, how you look at others, how you make decisions. In the past, you may have needed motivation to begin, but when identity shifts, you only need the right conditions. You no longer resist action. You look for ways to make it easier to happen. This is a clear sign of transformation. You stop asking how to force yourself to act. You start asking how to make this action more likely to occur. When the question changes, your role changes. You are no longer someone who needs to be pushed. You become a designer, the architect of your own life. Keeping your word to yourself in small things has a special power. It does not create external noise, no recognition, no immediate reward. But precisely because of that, it builds a very pure form of self-respect. Self-respect that does not depend on attention, that does not require comparison. It comes from consistency between what you say and what you do. When that consistency becomes thick enough, you are no longer easily shaken. Praise does not inflate you. Criticism does not collapse you. You have an internal anchor. And that anchor is rare. Many people live their entire lives without it. They search for value outside because there is no foundation inside. Identity transformation also changes how you view failure. Before, when you slipped, you may have concluded that you were not good enough. But when identity is built, you see slips as data. One misstep does not invalidate who you are. It only calls for adjustment. You no longer fall into self-criticism loops. You return to commitment. And this ability to return quickly is the real sign of strength. Not never slipping, but not staying on the ground for long. When you become someone who keeps their word even when no one is watching, you no longer need to talk much about discipline. Discipline has integrated into how you live. You do not need to create an image. You do not need to persuade. Your presence speaks for itself. You enter the day with a different calm. Not rushed, not tense. Just knowing you will do what needs to be done. This brings a very quiet form of power. The power of someone not pulled by emotion, not completely controlled by circumstance. The power of someone who can stand alone with their own standard. When this identity is solid enough, you begin to attract different results. Not because you try harder, but because you no longer sabotage yourself. You no longer make decisions that contradict your values. You no longer repeat old loops. Life begins to reflect who you have become. Not loudly, not suddenly, but clearly. And when you look back, you realize that the greatest change was not what you achieved, but who you built inside to be able to hold what you achieved. This is when you understand that success is not a destination. It is the natural consequence of an identity forged long enough in silence. Resistance is not a sign that you are on the wrong path. It is proof that you are touching something important. Each time you move closer to a better version of yourself, an invisible force appears. This force does not need a name. It shows up as heaviness, as thoughts of postponing, as the urge to return to familiar old habits. Resistance does not shout. It whispers. It says today is not necessary, that tomorrow will be better, that you have already tried enough. And because that voice sounds very much like your own voice, you easily believe it. But resistance does not care about your potential. It only cares about keeping things the same. It exists to protect what is familiar, not what is right. When you understand this, you stop personalizing resistance. You stop thinking you are weak. You begin to see resistance as part of the process, a signal to be recognized rather than an enemy to be destroyed. The way to move through resistance is not to fight it head-on. Fighting only makes it stronger. The way through is to remove the reason it exists, and that only happens when you make action specific. Resistance grows in vagueness. It expands when goals are too broad, when tasks are too large, when outcomes feel too distant. But when you shrink action down to something very concrete, resistance loses its shape. It no longer knows what to argue against. When all you need to do is sit down for a few minutes, resistance no longer has a strong enough story to pull you away. This is why people who go far do not ask whether they will act or not. They only ask where to begin. They do not give resistance the chance to debate. They step into action before the mind can build fences. One important principle in moving through resistance is acting before thinking. This does not mean acting blindly. It means you do not allow thinking to lead during the moment of initiation. Thinking tends to protect the status quo. Small action tends to break it. When you act first, thinking follows. And when thinking follows, emotion adjusts. This is the correct sequence. Not think, then act, but act to think differently. Resistance also has a very subtle strategy. It waits until you are tired, until you are stressed, until you have just been disappointed. Then it offers a form of rest that sounds very reasonable, and because you are weak in that moment, you accept it. The problem is not rest itself. The problem is rest without boundaries. When you rest without structure, you slide easily. That is why moving through resistance requires you to design how you rest as well. Rest with intention, rest with duration, rest without losing rhythm. This protects you from turning one tired day into a series of directionless days. Resistance also likes to appear when you are making progress. When things start going better, it whispers that you have done enough, that you can slow down. And that is where many people lose momentum. They think danger lies at the beginning, but in reality, the most dangerous moment is after you have already moved forward, when discipline begins to loosen, when standards begin to slip. People who go far understand this. They do not suddenly raise standards. They protect the baseline standard. They keep the fundamentals even when things are going well. And this steadiness during ease is the true mark of strength. Moving through resistance also requires changing how you speak to yourself. Instead of asking why this feels hard, you ask, what is the smallest thing I can do right now? Instead of blaming yourself for not wanting to act, you accept that not wanting to is normal, and then you act anyway. This inner voice does not need to motivate. It needs to be clear about the next step, clear about not negotiating presence. When you do this long enough, resistance does not disappear completely, but it loses power. It still appears, but you no longer follow it. You recognize that every time resistance shows up, it is a sign that you are standing at the edge of a new level of growth. And instead of stepping back, you step through, not with great force, but with a small, timely action. And each time you step through, you reinforce a very important truth, that you can move forward even when the inside pushes back. And this ability is the core of mature strength, not loud courage, but quiet, repeated presence, day after day, until resistance is no longer a wall but only an echo behind you. Motivation is not something you can rely on long term. It comes and goes according to biology, pressure, and circumstances. If your life requires motivation to function, it will soon become unstable. On days it is present, you move forward. On days it is absent, you stand still, and standing still long enough turns into sliding backward. This is why systems matter more than inspiration. A system does not care how you feel. It exists to keep you on track when emotion does not cooperate. When you have a system, you do not need to decide again every day. You simply step into the structure you already set. And it is this repetition that creates stability that motivation can never provide. A system does not have to be complex. It does not need to be perfect. It needs to be clear enough to use on tired days, when you are too exhausted to think you can still follow a system. And that is when a system shows its real value. A good system answers in advance the questions you usually have to ask yourself when you are weak. When to start? What to start with? How long is enough? How to rest without losing rhythm? Every question answered in advance removes a point of friction. And when friction is reduced, action becomes much easier. Many people fail not because they do not want to move forward, but because they leave too many decisions to make on exhausted days. The brain becomes drained not from working but from deciding. A system cuts that exhaustion. It is like a rail. Once the rail is there, you do not need to steer. You only need to stay on it. One important element in building a system is accepting imperfection. A system is not designed for ideal days. It is designed for bad days. If your system only works when you have energy, it is not a system. It is a fragile plan. A mature system has a version for weekdays, a minimum version, a keep the rhythm version, a version that does not allow you to disappear. When you accept that there will be days when you do very little, you free yourself from the pressure of always performing well. And that freedom is what allows you to continue. A system also needs a tracking point, not to control harshly, but to create feedback. When you see a chain of days where you kept rhythm, you have evidence that you are moving forward. This evidence is critical during phases when external results have not appeared yet. It keeps belief alive, not vague belief, but belief grounded in data. You see how many days you showed up, you see what you maintained. And that is enough to continue even when big results are not visible. A good system also has a fallback. It knows there will be days when rhythm breaks, and it has already prepared a way back. The next day does not require compensation, no punishment, just a return to the baseline standard. When you skip this, you easily turn one misstep into a self-blame story, and that story can pull you even farther off the rail. A mature system does not judge, it simply guides you back. This is especially important for adults who have quit many times before. You do not need more pressure. You need a structure that allows mistakes while still moving forward. When the system is built, you notice a subtle shift. You no longer wait to feel ready. You no longer need to convince yourself. You simply follow the rhythm. And this rhythm creates a strange kind of calm. The calm of someone who knows that no matter how today feels, direction is not lost. That even when tired, the core is still protected. This is when you begin to understand why resilient people do not talk much about motivation. They live inside systems, and those systems quietly carry them through phases where relying on inspiration alone would have made them quit long ago. When your life is supported by systems, you are no longer afraid of exhausting days. You know that tired days do not ruin progress. They only slow it down, and slow within a system is far better than fast and then disappearing. This is the foundation of real progress. Not flashy, not dramatic, but strong enough to build an entire life upon. You do not live in a vacuum. Every day you are being shaped by what surrounds you, not only by big decisions but by small, repeated influences. The space you are in, the sounds you hear, the content you consume, the people you interact with. All of these are quietly training your behavior. And if you do not intentionally design your environment will design you in a way that is convenient for it, not in a way that is good for you. Many people try to change through willpower while keeping the same old context. They want to focus but keep their phone within reach. They want discipline but live among constant complaints. They want to move forward but expose themselves daily to stories that make them doubt themselves. Then they wonder why everything feels like a fight. The truth is, you cannot win long-term if you have to fight your environment every day. The environment does not need to be stronger than you. It only needs to be consistently present. And it is that consistency that slowly wears you down. Changing your environment does not require extreme actions. It is practical. Move distractions farther away. Bring supportive elements closer. Arrange your space so the desired action becomes the easiest option. When you do this, you do not need more discipline. You reduce the need for discipline. You do not force yourself to resist temptation. You make temptation harder to access. You do not force yourself to remember to act. You allow cues for action to appear naturally. This is how adults work with themselves, not through confrontation but through design. The people around you are also part of the environment. You do not need deep conversations every day. You only need to observe. After being around them, do you feel clearer or more drained? Do you feel lifted or pulled down? Not everyone needs to leave your life, but not everyone should have equal influence. You need to be selective about where you open up, where you share goals, where you seek feedback. When you place your goals in the hands of people who do not live by those values, you weaken your own commitment, not because they are bad, but because they are on a different trajectory. Environment also includes the stories you repeat in your own mind, how you speak to yourself, how you explain a bad day. If your inner environment is full of self-blame and comparison, it will be hard to keep rhythm, no matter how good the outer environment is. That is why environment design is two-sided, outer and inner. Outside, you reduce noise. Inside, you choose clear language. Instead of saying, "Today I am failing," you say, "Today I am tired, but I still showed up." This difference is small, but repeated long enough, it changes how you see yourself. A good environment does not constantly excite you. It stabilizes you. It does not push you to be fast. It allows you to move steadily. And steady movement is what carries you far. When the environment is designed well, you realize something important. You do not need to be the strongest person in the room. You only need to be in the right room. A room where consistent action is normal, where keeping your word is not strange, where slow progress is respected more than short bursts. When you are in such an environment, you do not need to explain yourself. You do not need to justify. You simply live by the standard you chose. And that environment lifts you naturally. This is not avoiding difficulty. This is strategy. You protect energy to use it for what matters. You do not waste it on unnecessary battles. When you understand the power of environment, you stop blaming yourself for past burnout. You begin to ask a different question. Who is my current environment training me to become? And if the answer does not fit, you do not need anger. You only need adjustment. A small cleanup. A small habit change. One less exposure. One more supportive signal. These changes do not feel dramatic, but they change trajectory, and a new trajectory held long enough will take you to a very different life. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped making it harder on yourself. There is a very clear boundary between understanding and maturity. Understanding gives you language. Maturity gives you the power to take responsibility. When you take absolute responsibility, you stop looking outside for reasons to explain why you are not moving forward. Not because the world is fair, not because circumstances are easy, but because you understand a core truth. Only when you take responsibility do you gain the power to change. Blame may make you feel lighter for a moment, but it takes away your power to act. Every time you say, because of circumstances, because of other people, because of timing, you are handing the steering wheel to something outside your control. And when the wheel is not in your hands, your life will follow someone else's momentum. Absolute responsibility does not mean self-punishment. It does not mean saying everything is your fault. It means saying that your response to everything is your responsibility. You cannot choose what happens, but you can choose what you do next. And that choice, repeated long enough, becomes destiny. When you stand in this position, you stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop waiting for others to change. You stop waiting for emotions to settle. You begin asking a different question. In this situation, what is the smallest thing I can do to keep direction? This question is powerful because it always has an answer. No matter how bad the circumstances, there is always a small action within reach. When you choose that action, you take back the steering wheel, not through force, but through presence. Absolute responsibility also changes how you see the past. You no longer use the past as proof that you cannot. You use it as data to adjust the system. You see slips as information. Information about weak points in structure. Information about moments where you need more support. And when you use data instead of emotion, you do not get trapped in regret. You move forward with clarity. This is especially important for those who have failed many times. Each failure, if not processed properly, becomes a limiting story. But when you stand in absolute responsibility, you rewrite that story. You say, I learned this, and I will adjust like this. No resentment. No self-pity, just the next action. When you live long enough with absolute responsibility, a very different feeling appears. Calm, not because things are easier, but because you no longer argue with reality. You accept what is and focus on what can be done. This calm frees a great amount of energy. Energy that was once spent complaining, comparing, and regretting is now used for progress. You do not need to win every situation. You only need to stay in the driver's seat, even when you move slowly, even when the road is rough. Absolute responsibility also sets a very clear standard for promises. When you promise, you understand that no one is coming to save you if you do not act. No one will bear the consequences for you if you slip. And this clarity makes promises more serious. You do not promise carelessly. You do not commit based on emotion. You choose carefully, and you hold firmly. When you do this, you no longer need external pressure. You do not need supervision. You supervise yourself through the standard you chose. This is the sign of true maturity. Not someone who never makes mistakes, but someone who does not run from responsibility when mistakes happen. When you take absolute responsibility, you also allow yourself to stop complaining. Complaining is not wrong. But prolonged complaining makes you forget that you still have choice. When you stop complaining, you do not become cold. You become effective. You use time to adjust instead of lament. And each small adjustment accumulates into a new direction. The moment you truly take back the steering wheel is not when you feel powerful. It is when you decide to do the next right thing, even without emotional support. No audience, no reward. just you and your choice. And when you repeat that choice long enough, you no longer ask who is controlling your life. You know the answer. And from that position, you can step into the final part of this journey, not to seek new motivation, but to make a commitment deep enough to carry you forward even when everything is quiet. This journey does not end with a loud moment of victory. It ends with a very quiet choice. The choice you carry when no one is telling you what to do. When this video ends, when there is no guidance left, when you return to familiar rhythms, that is where real commitment begins. Not a commitment to change everything, not a promise to become a different person overnight, but a very specific commitment that from today you will repeat what is right, even if it is small, even if it is slow, even if no one sees it. You have gone far enough in this story to understand an important truth. Life does not change because of one big decision. It changes because of small choices held long enough. You do not need more inspiration. You already have enough. You do not need more knowledge. You already understand. The only thing missing is a commitment humble enough to be kept every day. A commitment not to disappear. A commitment to return after every slip. A commitment to show up even when the inside does not want to. When you choose this commitment, you are not promising the world. You are promising yourself. And that promise does not need to be spoken loudly. It needs to be lived. Starting tomorrow when you wake up, you do not need to think about your whole life. You only need to think about the anchor of that day, the small thing you chose to keep. When you do that, you do not need to feel proud. You only need to acknowledge that you kept your word. And that acknowledgement matters. It nourishes inner trust, the trust that you are someone who does not abandon yourself. There will be days when you are tired, days when you doubt, days when you slip. Those days do not break the commitment if you return. What breaks the commitment is using one bad day to abandon the direction. But you no longer need to do that. You have the map. You understand the structure. You know that one small, timely step is always stronger than a large intention left unkept. This final commitment does not ask you to prove anything to anyone. It only asks you to be honest with your choice. When you say today, I will show up, you show up. Even if little, even if imperfect, even if without emotion. And every day you do that, you are building a different life. Not through explosive effort, but through quiet consistency. At some point you will look back and realize the change happened long ago, not because you tried harder than others, but because you stopped leaving the path you chose. A new life does not begin on a perfect day. It begins on an ordinary day when you decide to live with intention. Right now, starting with the smallest thing, and from that moment, everything you repeat will slowly pull you toward the person you know you can become. You have reached the end of this journey. And if you are still here, it shows that a very deep part of you is ready to live differently. What you have just heard is not temporary motivation. It is a clear map that shows why life does not change simply through understanding, but changes when you hold on to small things every day. You have seen that procrastination is not because you are weak, but because you lack structure. That emotion cannot lead, but commitment can keep you steady. That discipline does not take away freedom, but creates sustainable freedom. And that when you keep your word to yourself in silence, you are building a new identity strong enough to carry you far. If this content helped you see more clearly how you are living, or caused you to pause and think about what you repeat each day, take one small action right now. Press like to support the channel. Share this video with someone you know who needs to hear this. And subscribe to continue walking with stories that help you live with intention, strength, and stability every day. Thank you for listening, and I will see you again on the next journey.